She helped a struggling dad and his kid, then found out he was her boss asterisk. The rain hammered against the windows of chapter and verse bookstore like angry fists demanding entry. Emma Rodriguez pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she tallied the day's meager sales. 3 books sold, 2 returned. The numbers on her ledger seemed to mock her dreams of keeping the little bookstore alive. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty street outside. Emma glanced at the clock on the wall between the poetry and romance sections. 9:30. She should have closed an hour ago, but the storm had trapped her here, and honestly, she had nowhere else to rush to. Her small apartment above the bakery. Next door felt lonelier than usual these days. Thunder rolled across the harbor, and Emma jumped when she heard something else over the storm's fury. A child's cry, thin and frightened, cutting through the night. She pressed her face to the rain-streaked window. Squinting into the darkness, there, huddled under the narrow awning of the antique shop across the street, she saw them. A man crouched beside a small figure trying to shield her from the driving rain with his jacket. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her tiny frame shaking with cold and fear. Emma's heart clenched. She unlocked the door and stepped into the storm, rain instantly soaking her brown curls. "Hey!" she called out, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Come inside." The man looked up, his dark eyes reflecting the streetlight. Even through the rain, Emma could see the exhaustion etched in his face, the way his shoulders sagged with defeat. He was handsome in a weathered way, with strong features and hair that might have been perfectly styled hours ago, but now hung damp and disheveled. "I don't want to impose," he called back, his voice carrying a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "You're not imposing," Emma shouted, gesturing frantically toward her store. "Please, bring her inside before you both catch pneumonia." The man seemed to weigh his options for a moment, then scooped up the little girl and rushed across the street. Emma held the door wide, ushering them into the warm, book-scented sanctuary of her store. "Thank you," the man said, setting the child down gently. "I'm James Mitchell, and this is my daughter Sophie." Emma grabbed a couple of towels from the small bathroom in the back and handed them over. "Emma Rodriguez. And you're both soaked to the bone." Sophie peered out from behind her father's legs, her blonde curls plastered to her head. She wore a pink dress that had seen better days and shoes that squeaked with every step. Her blue eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity as she took in the towering bookshelves surrounding them. "Are you a librarian?" Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. Emma knelt down to the child's level, smiling warmly. "I'm a bookstore owner. It means I sell books instead of lending them out. But you can look at any book you want while you're here." Sophie's eyes lit up with wonder. She took a tentative step toward the children's section, where colorful books lined the lower shelves. "Sophie loves stories," James said, running the towel through his hair. "She's been asking me to read to her for days, but we've been... double quotes, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Traveling?" James nodded, but something in his expression suggested there was more to the story. "Something like that?" Emma noticed the way James's expensive-looking shirt hung loose on his frame, as if he'd lost weight recently. His watch was clearly valuable, but his shoes were worn thin. There was a story there. She was sure of it, but she'd learned not to pry too deeply into other people's business. "Well, you're both safe now," she said, locking the door against the storm. "Why don't I make some tea? I have a little kitchen in the back." As Emma busied herself with the kettle, she watched James and Sophie explore her store. Sophie had found a picture book about a brave little mouse and was sitting cross-legged on the reading carpet, completely absorbed. Quiet.
I went away on what a why do we go why we're and with I don't know why we're where do I what time why
his hand resting protectively on her shoulder as he scanned the shelves. "You have good taste," James said, nodding toward the literature section. "First editions of Steinbeck and Hemingway." Emma looked up from the tea preparations, surprised. "You know, books? I used to read more," James said softly, "before life got complicated." The kettle whistled, and Emma poured 3 cups of chamomile tea, adding extra honey to Sophie's cup. She brought them over to the reading area, where Sophie was now acting out scenes from the mouse book. "The mouse is very brave," Sophie announced, making the book's hero climb an imaginary mountain, even when the owl tries to scare him. "Just like you," James said, settling beside his daughter on the carpet. "You're the bravest person I know." Sophie beamed at her father, then looked at Emma with serious eyes. "Are you brave too?" Emma considered the question. Was she brave? She'd been too afraid to leave her hometown for college, too scared to take the loan that might have expanded her store, too frightened to take real risks. But she'd also opened her door to strangers on a stormy night, and that took a different kind of courage. "I'm learning to be," Emma said, finally. As the storm raged outside, the 3 of them sat in the warm circle of lamplight, surrounded by thousands of stories waiting to be discovered. Emma found herself studying James's profile as he read to Sophie, noting the gentle way he turned each page, the patience in his voice as he explained difficult words. There was something about this man that called to her, something beyond his obvious devotion to his daughter. She sensed a kindness that had been tested by hardship, a strength that came from surviving difficult times. When Sophie finally fell asleep against her father's shoulder, Emma brought out a soft blanket from her office and tucked it around the little girl. "She's beautiful," Emma whispered. James's eyes were tender as he looked down at his sleeping daughter. "She's everything to me, everything I have left." The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. Emma wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand the sorrow that seemed to shadow him, but she sensed this wasn't the time. Instead, she simply said, "You're both welcome to stay until the storm passes." James looked up at her, and for a moment their eyes held. Emma felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger, rattling the old building's windows and sending sheets of rain cascading down the glass. Emma had called the weather service from her old rotary phone behind the counter, only to learn that the storm was expected to last through the night. "Looks like you're stuck with me," Emma said, hanging up the phone. "The roads are flooded, and they're advising everyone to stay indoors." James shifted Sophie's sleeping form more comfortably against his shoulder. "I'm sorry. We've already imposed." "Enough. Don't be silly," Emma said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "I was going to be here all night anyway. The apartment upstairs is being fumigated, so I've been sleeping on the couch in my office." She gestured toward the back of the store, where a small door led to her workspace. "Besides, it's nice to have company. This place can get pretty lonely after dark." James studied her face in the lamplight. "You live here alone? Just me and—" "About 10,000 books," Emma said with a self-deprecating smile. "My ex-fiancé used to say I cared more about fictional characters than real people." "And what did you say to that?" Emma considered the question. "I said he was probably right. Fictional characters are more reliable. They don't leave you 3 weeks before your wedding for someone younger and more ambitious." James winced. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Me a favor, really. I would have spent my whole life trying to be someone I wasn't." Emma tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "What about you? Are you married?" The question seemed to hit James like a physical blow. His arms tightened around Sophie, and for a moment Emma thought he wouldn't answer. "I was," he said finally. "Sophie's mother died 2 years ago. Cancer, oh, James. I'm so sorry." He nodded, his jaw tight with old grief. "Sarah was everything good about me. When she died, I lost my way completely. Lost my job, lost our house. Lost everything except Sophie. Emma felt her heart break for this man and his little girl. That's why you were on the street tonight. We've been staying in a shelter across town, but they were full tonight because of the storm. I thought maybe we could find somewhere to wait it out. But he gestured helplessly at the windows where rain continued to lash against the glass. Well, you found me, Emma said softly. And I'm glad you did. Their eyes met again, and Emma felt that same electric connection she'd noticed earlier. James was nothing like her ex-fiancé, nothing like the safe, predictable men she usually dated. There was something dangerous about the way he made her feel, something that made her want to throw caution to the wind. Are you hungry? She asked, needing to break the intensity of the moment. I have some soup in the office kitchen. Nothing fancy, but it's warm. James's relief was palpable. It would be wonderful. Sophie hasn't eaten much today. Emma carefully lifted the sleeping child from James's arms, marveling at how light she was, how fragile. Sophie stirred slightly, but didn't wake, her small hands clutching at Emma's sweater. She likes you, James observed, following Emma toward the office. She doesn't usually warm up to strangers so quickly. Children and I understand each other, Emma said, settling Sophie on the small sofa in her office. We both know what it's like to need someone to take care of us. The office was cramped but cozy, with a desk covered in papers, a bookshelf filled with accounting ledgers and personal favorites, and a tiny kitchenette wedged into one corner. Emma heated up the vegetable soup she'd brought for lunch and found some crackers in her desk drawer. This is really kind of you, James said, accepting a steaming bowl. I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to repay me. Sometimes people just need help. Emma settled into the chair across from him, her own soup growing cold as she watched him eat. Can I ask you something? James nodded. What did you do before? For work, I mean? James set down his spoon, his expression guarded. I was in business. Corporate consulting, mostly. I helped companies restructure, improve efficiency, that sort of thing. That sounds important. It was supposed to be. But when Sarah got sick, I realized how meaningless it all was. I was traveling constantly, missing birthdays and school plays, always promising I'd spend more time with them later. His voice cracked slightly. There wasn't supposed to be a later. Emma reached across the small table and covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm, calloused in a way that suggested recent manual labor. You're with Sophie now. That's what matters. James turned his hand palm up, capturing her fingers. You're very wise for someone so young. I'm 32, Emma said, acutely aware of the way his thumb was tracing circles on her palm. Not exactly young. You seem young to me. There's something hopeful about you, something that hasn't been touched by cynicism yet. Emma felt herself blushing. You don't know me very well. I know you opened your door to strangers in a storm. I know you're gentle with frightened children. I know you choose to surround yourself with stories about love and adventure and happy endings. James's dark eyes were intense, searching. I know you're beautiful. The word hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Emma felt her breath catch, her heart hammering against her ribs. It had been so long since anyone had called her beautiful, longer still since she'd felt the electric pull of attraction. James, she whispered, not sure if she was warning him away or inviting him closer. He seemed to understand her confusion. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned across the table. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. Is this okay? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Never been kissed in a bookstore office during a thunderstorm by a man whose life was falling apart, but somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When his lips touched hers, gentle and questioning, Emma felt something inside her come alive. The kiss deepened, full of longing and the desperate need for connection. James tasted like chamomile tea and possibility, like the promise of stories yet to be written. When they finally broke apart, or both breathing hard, Emma rested her forehead against his. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely insane, James agreed, his hands still framing her face. I'm homeless, unemployed, and have a 6-year-old daughter to think about. And I'm a failed bookstore owner who can't even keep her own life together. So what do we do? Emma looked into his eyes, saw the same mixture of hope and fear that she felt. Maybe we just see what happens next. Emma woke to the sound of silence. After hours of rain pounding against the windows, the sudden quiet was almost startling. Pale morning light filtered through the office blinds, casting everything in a soft golden glow. She was curled up in her desk chair. A blanket she didn't remember pulling over herself tucked around her shoulders. The events of the night came flooding back. James, Sophie, the storm, the kiss that had left her feeling like she was floating somewhere between dream and reality. She sat up, looking around the small office with eyes that felt gritty from too little sleep. The couch where Sophie had been sleeping was empty, the blanket folded neatly at one end. Emma's heart sank, even as she told herself she'd been foolish to expect anything different. Of course they'd left. What had she been thinking? That a kiss in a bookstore office during a storm could change everything? The chair, her back protesting from the awkward sleeping position. The main store was quiet, morning sunlight streaming through the large front windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that looked washed clean and new. Emma moved through the store, touching the spines of books like old friends, trying to shake off the melancholy that had settled over her. She'd known James for less than 12 hours. It was ridiculous to feel this empty, this abandoned. But as she rounded the corner toward the children's section, she stopped short. There, on the reading carpet where Sophie had fallen asleep, was a small piece of paper folded into a neat square. Emma's name was written on the outside in careful block letters. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the paper. It was a drawing, clearly done by Sophie. A woman with brown curly hair stood in front of a building filled with books, smiling widely. Next to her stood a man and a little girl, all three holding hands under a rainbow that stretched across the top of the page. Below the picture, in Sophie's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for the stories and the warmth." Emma pressed the drawing to her chest, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She looked around the store, suddenly noticing other small signs of their presence. The children's books had been reorganized, arranged by color in a way that was both beautiful and completely impractical. The reading carpet had been straightened. Someone had even watered the half-dead plant that sat on the counter, moving toward the front of the store. Emma found another surprise. A white envelope sat on the counter next to her cash register, her name written on the outside in a different hand. James's handwriting was strong and confident, the letters perfectly formed. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper and something else. Emma unfolded the paper first, her heart racing as she read, "Emma, I've never believed in fate. But finding you last night has made me reconsider. Sophie hasn't smiled like that since before her mother died. You gave us more than shelter from the storm. You gave us a glimpse of what it feels like to be part of something good again. I know I have no right to ask this, but I hope I'll see you again.
What?
I hope last night was the beginning of something, not just a beautiful moment stolen from the storm. The enclosed is all I have right now, but I wanted you to have it. Consider it a down payment on all the books Sophie will want to buy when I get back on my feet, with more gratitude than I can express. James P.S. Your ex-fiance was an idiot." Emma's hands shook as she reached into the envelope and pulled out the other item. It was a business card, expensive looking, with raised lettering. But it wasn't James's business card. The name on it was Mitchell and Associates Corporate Consulting, and the card bore the logo of a company Emma recognized, Hartwell Industries. Emma's blood ran cold. Hartwell Industries was the massive corporation that had been buying up properties all over the historic district, including her building. They were the reason she'd been getting eviction notices, the reason she might have to close chapter and verse within the month. She turned the card over, looking for some explanation, some way to make sense of what she was seeing. On the back, in James's handwriting, was a phone number and the words, "Call me." Emma sank onto the stool behind the counter, her mind reeling. James Mitchell, Mitchell and Associates. Could it be a coincidence? But even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't. The expensive clothes, the cultured accent, the way he'd recognized her first edition books, it all made sense now. The man she'd kissed. The man she'd been falling for worked for the company that was trying to destroy everything she'd built. Emma stared at the business card, feeling like she was seeing James clearly for the first time. Had the whole thing been some kind of elaborate scheme? Some way to get inside information about her business? But even as the paranoid thoughts swirled through her mind, she remembered the pain in his eyes when he'd talked about his wife. The gentle way he'd held Sophie, the genuine emotion in his kiss. No. Whatever else James Mitchell might be, he wasn't. A liar. The grief, the desperation, the connection she'd felt, none of that had been fake. Emma picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of the card. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello, James." Came out steadier than she felt. "It's Emma. We need to talk." There was a long pause, and Emma could hear Sophie's voice in the background, asking about breakfast. "Emma." James's voice was soft, surprised. "I was hoping you'd call, but I wasn't sure. ... I found your business card," Emma said, cutting him off. "Mitchell and Associates. Hartwell Industries." Another pause, longer this time. When James spoke again, his voice was tight with something that might have been regret. "I can explain." "Can you? Because right now, it looks like the man I kissed last night works for the company that's trying to put me out of business." "It's not what you think, Emma. I swear to you, it's not what you think." "Then what is it, James?" "Because I'm looking at eviction notices from your company, and I'm trying to figure out if everything that happened last night was some kind of sick joke." "No." James's voice was fierce now, urgent. "Emma, no. Last night was real. What happened between us was real." "I would never then explain it to me," Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. "Because I want to believe you. I want to believe that what I felt last night wasn't just some stupid fantasy." "Meet me," James said immediately. "Give me a chance to explain everything. There's so much you don't know, so much I should have told you." Emma closed her eyes, Sophie's drawing still clutched in her free hand. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was a mistake, that she should hang up the phone and pretend the whole thing had never happened. But her heart, her stubborn, hopeful heart, wanted to hear what he had to say. "One chance," she said finally. "One chance to make this make sense." "Thank you," James said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "Thank you, Emma. I won't waste it." Emma spent the morning pacing her store like a caged animal, alternating between anger and confusion. She'd agreed to meet James at noon at the small cafe down the street. But as the hour approached, she found herself second-guessing the decision. What if this was all part of some elaborate corporate scheme? What if James was just another smooth-talking businessman who saw her as an obstacle to be removed? But then she'd look at Sophie's drawing, still pinned to her bulletin board, and remember the way James had held his daughter, the genuine grief in his voice when he'd spoken about his wife? That man, the one who'd kissed her with such desperate tenderness, couldn't be a fraud. Could he? 11:55, Emma locked up the store and walked the 2 blocks to Harbor Caf, her stomach churning with anxiety. The morning was crisp and clear, the storm having washed away the oppressive humidity that had been building for days.
Oh.
Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect day. She spotted James immediately, sitting at a corner table with Sophie beside him. The little girl was coloring in a book, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. James looked up as Emma approached, and she saw the same mixture of hope and fear in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. "Emma," he said, rising from his chair. "Thank you for coming, Miss Emma." Sophie looked up from her coloring, face bright with excitement. "Daddy said you might come have lunch with us." Emma's heart melted a little at the child's enthusiasm. Whatever else James might be, he was clearly a devoted father. "Hi, Sophie. That's a beautiful picture you're working on." "It's a dragon," Sophie announced proudly. "But it's a nice dragon that helps people instead of scaring them." "Those are the best kind," Emma said, settling into the chair across from James. She noticed he'd chosen a table where they could talk without being overheard, away from the lunch crowd. "Sophie, why don't you go wash your hands before we order?" James suggested gently. The bathroom is right over there. Sophie nodded and skipped away, leaving Emma and James alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions.
No.
Look tired, Emma said finally. James ran a hand through his hair. I didn't sleep much after we left your store. Kept thinking about what I should have told you, how I should have explained everything from the beginning. So explain it now. James took a deep breath. I do work for Hartwell Industries. Or rather, I did. I was their senior consultant for property acquisition and development. My job was to identify buildings and businesses that could be repurposed for more profitable use. Emma felt her stomach drop. Like my bookstore. Like your bookstore. James confirmed quietly. Emma, I'm the one who wrote the report recommending that your building be converted into luxury condos. I'm the reason you're getting eviction notices. For a moment, Emma couldn't speak. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow, making it hard to breathe. So last night was what? Research? Getting to know your victim? No, James said fiercely. Emma, no, I haven't worked for Hartwell in 6 months. I was fired. Fired? I had a breakdown after Sarah died. Started missing meetings, making mistakes, questioning everything about what I was doing with my life. The final straw was when I refused to sign off on a project that would have displaced a dozen families from low-income housing. James's voice was bitter. Apparently, developing a conscience is grounds for termination at Hartwell Industries. Emma studied his face, looking for signs of deception. But all she saw was pain, regret, and something that looked like self-loathing. That's why you were on the street last night, she said slowly. You lost your job because you grew a conscience. I lost everything because I finally realized that the work I was doing was destroying people's lives. Your life, Emma, I signed. The papers that started the process of taking away everything you've built. Sophie returned from the bathroom, climbing back into her chair with the unself-conscious grace of childhood. Can we order now? I'm really hungry. Emma looked at the little girl, then back at James. We should order, she said quietly. Sophie needs to eat. They ordered sandwiches and soup, making small talk about the weather and Sophie's coloring book while they waited for their food. But Emma could feel the weight of unfinished conversation hanging over them like a storm cloud. When Sophie became absorbed in her chicken nuggets, Emma leaned forward. So what now? Are you going back to corporate consulting? James shook his head. I can't. I won't. I'm trying to figure out what comes next, but I know it won't be helping rich people get richer by destroying communities. That's very noble, Emma said, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm still getting evicted. Maybe it does, James said quietly. Emma, there's something else I need to tell you, something I found. Out this morning, Emma waited, her heart pounding. I still have contacts at Hartwell, people who owe me favors. I made some calls after I left your store. James leaned forward, his voice urgent. The new owner of your building is not just some faceless corporation. He's someone who's been looking for an opportunity to make a splash in the historic district. Someone who cares more about prestige than profit. What are you saying? I'm saying that if the right person approached him, someone who could show him the value of keeping chapter and verse as part of the neighborhood's charm, he might be willing to negotiate. He might even be willing to sell. Emma stared at him. And you think you're the right person? I think I know how to talk to people like him. I think I know what matters to him. James reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I think I owe you that much at least. You don't owe me anything, James? Yes, I do. I owe you for giving us shelter last night. I owe you for showing Sophie kindness when she needed it most. I owe you for reminding me that there are still good people in the world. His eyes were intense, searching. And I owe you for making me remember what it feels like to hope. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. James, ... I know you have no reason to trust me. I know that everything about this situation is completely insane. But Emma, what I felt last night, what I still feel sitting here with you, that's real. That's the most real thing I've experienced in 2 years. Sophie looked up from her lunch, glancing between the two adults with the uncanny perception of children. Are you sad, Miss Emma? Emma wiped her eyes, managing a smile.
What?
Just a little bit, sweetheart. But sometimes being a little bit sad is... Okay. My daddy gets sad sometimes too, Sophie said matter-of-factly. But he's been happier since we met you. Out of the mouths of babes, Emma thought. She looked at James, saw the vulnerability in his expression, the way he was holding his breath, waiting for her answer. One condition, she said finally. Anything? You're going to help me save my store? You do it honestly. No corporate games, no manipulation, no using people's emotions against them, just honest negotiation. James nodded immediately. I promise. Complete transparency from now on. And if this works out, if we manage to save chapter and verse, ... yes. Took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. Then you let me take you and Sophie out for a real dinner, somewhere nice, where we can start over and get to know each other properly. The smile that spread across James's face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. Emma Rodriguez? Are you asking me on a date? I'm asking you to give us a chance to find out if what happened last night was just the storm talking, or if it's something worth fighting for. James reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing over her knuckles. It's worth fighting for, he said softly. You're worth fighting for. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, smoothing down the green dress she'd bought for the occasion. Tonight was the grand reopening of chapter and verse, and she could hardly believe it was really happening. Her window, she could see the warm light spilling out of her store windows, and the small crowd of people already gathering outside. James had been true to his word. He'd approached the new building owner, a wealthy businessman named Richard Hartwell, who'd inherited the company from his father, somehow managed to convince him that keeping the bookstore would add authentic charm to the historic district. The negotiation had taken 2 weeks of careful maneuvering, but in the end, Hartwell had agreed to sell the building to Emma at a price she could actually afford, with financing that wouldn't cripple her. You clean up nice, James said from the doorway. And Emma turned to find him leaning against the frame, looking devastatingly handsome in a dark suit. The past 3 weeks had been good to him. He'd found work as a freelance consultant, helping small businesses navigate corporate buyouts and development pressures. The haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by something Emma could only describe as purpose. You don't look so bad yourself, Emma said, walking over to straighten his tie. Where's Sophie? Downstairs? Charming your customers? She's appointed. Herself the official greeter for the evening. Emma laughed. Of course she has. That child has more social skills than most adults. She gets that from her mother, James said softly, then caught himself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, James, Emma interrupted, placing her hand on his chest. You don't have to apologize for talking about Sarah. She was important to you, and she's Sophie's mother. I would never want you to pretend she didn't exist. James covered her hand with his own. Have I mentioned lately that you're incredible? Not in the last hour, Emma said, rising up on her toes to kiss him softly. But I'll take it. 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of negotiations, renovations, and stolen moments between James and Emma. They'd taken things slowly. Mindful of Sophie's needs and the complexity of their situation, James had moved into a small apartment across town, and Emma had helped him furnish it with books and secondhand furniture that made it feel like home. Their first official date had been to a children's museum with Sophie, followed by dinner at a family restaurant where Sophie had fallen asleep in the booth between them. It hadn't been romantic in the traditional sense. But Emma had never felt more content than she did watching James cut up Sophie's chicken while discussing her favorite. Books. Are you ready for this? James asked now, gesturing toward the window in the crowd below. Emma nodded, though butterflies were doing somersaults in her stomach. As ready as I'll ever be. I still can't believe we pulled it off. Make a good team, James said, offering her his arm. Shall we go greet your public? They walked downstairs together, emerging into the warm, book-scented atmosphere of the store. Emma had used part of the money she'd saved on rent to make some long-overdue improvements. The children's section had been expanded with child-sized chairs in a reading nook that Sophie had helped design. The cafe area in the back now had 3 small tables where customers could sit and read with their coffee. Sophie spotted them immediately and ran over, her face glowing with excitement. She wore a purple dress that James had bought especially for the occasion, and her hair was pulled back with a headband that matched Emma's. "Miss Emma, there are so many people here," Sophie exclaimed. And Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop brought cookies, and the man from the newspaper wants to take pictures. Emma looked around the store, her heart swelling with joy. The place was packed with neighbors, regular customers, and curious newcomers. She recognized the young couple from the apartment upstairs, the elderly man who came in every Tuesday for the crossword puzzle books, and the teenage girl who'd been working her way through the entire young adult section. Emma, Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop waved from the poetry section. "This is wonderful, dear. The whole neighborhood is talking about how you saved the store." "I'd help," Emma said, glancing at James. "A lot of help."